This is Power Athlete Radio. With your hosts, Denny K, Professor Booty, and the Luke Summers. And now, toes forward, hips locked, shoulders set, and retract those scapulars. It's time for some knowledge bombs.
What's happening, Power Athletes? Welcome to episode 63, Power Athlete Radio. It's going to be a good one. As always, I'm joined with the awesome fucking coaches from Power Athlete HQ. Let me get the order right, because Luke's sensitive about this. John, Luke, Callie, Tex, and we got a special guest with us, Mr. Robb Wolf. What's happening?
Not much. How are you guys doing?
What's up?
We are good.
At the bottom of the totem pole.
What?
Yeah,
I don't like this order. Denny, change it.
This tactical quilting guy, he's going to be coming in intermediately. You're like the Ed McMahon. We just moved you over to the couch.
Johnny.
That's all right, sir. You are right.
I've been working on my one-liners. I'm cool with this.
All right, get your chili hot.
Yeah.
I thought this was video, which horrified everybody because I haven't showered and I drank a couple of glasses of wine last night, so I was
we saw you
looking more rough than normal. So
By a couple glasses, he really means like 6 or 7, like tequila shots, a little bit of mescaline, but you know, who's counting?
That's getting your chili hot.
The terms he had came to mind.
As Robbie's driving around with Dr. Gonzo, you know, searching for the bats in the back of his car.
It is Reno, man. It is Reno. Yeah, you just have to keep your cap on the ether, altitude, and make that stuff evaporate very quickly.
Yeah, it's the guys that start huffing ether, the ones you got to be most nervous about. So, Mr. Wolf, what's going down, man? How's everything going?
Everything's good. We're, screaming towards Wolf Cub #2 arrival. Working on the City Zero project. We're getting a CEO hired for that and getting all the, the wheels on the wagon with that scene and getting the dog piss beat out of me at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that's really about the extent of my life right now.
Nice. So how's the training coming?
Training's pretty good. Johnny actually set me up on a 2-day-a-week Bulgarian split because, being an old dude and generally getting the crap beat out of me at jits, I just don't have a lot of time to train or recover. And so John, I had been tinkering with some 2-day splits for a while, but John actually put together kind of ramped up Bulgarian split for me, press, pull, squat, hinge. Each of these days, usually do one on a Sunday, one on a Wednesday, and work up to a speedy kind of 1-rep max, and then dial it back 20-25%, get a little bit of volume work done, and that's been working out really well. So that's basically been my strength work, and then most of the conditioning just coming from rolling, although I do a little bit of low-level cardio to as a recovery aid. But that's been about the extent of my stuff. But I actually got a triple with 425 on the back squat the other day at $170. So,
Jesus.
Nice. Not bad.
You must have been a teenage weightlifting powerlifting
Rumor has it Robb Wolf was a teenage state powerlifting champion.
We haven't even been 30 seconds into this podcast.
We have royalty on the phone.
It's similar to Tucker Max when we were at Paleo FX. He mentioned that anybody who's attended Harvard, you'll know that they've attended Harvard within 30 seconds. So yeah, similarly, I was in fact a teenage state powerlifting champion for California, which is the 5th largest economy on the planet. So
as soon as you said that, I thought about Lalonde, with the Harvard thing, and I'm like, yeah, that's true. Lalonde is quick to drop that, which is funny because Lalonde doesn't really have to really trump card people too often.
No.
But that's he'll definitely work it quickly into the conversation.
That's like John. That's like John's go-to. I'm sorry. Has anyone else been to the games here?
I did compete in the 2008 CrossFit Games. Nobody else in this room has competed at the CrossFit Games.
And you finished.
Yeah. I'm also have the distinction of being the largest athlete to ever compete in the CrossFit Games.
Not to mention 100 career NFL starts, 10 playoff appearances.
Well, no, that stuff's not important. The fact that I competed in the games is what's the important thing. And the best is that's when I had my famous meeting with Robb Wolf, where we'd obviously been emailing and been in contact, but we actually got to meet face to face. And I remember like Robbie just basically we started talking about training and nutrition, and he was just like the infamous Robb Wolf. Really? Really? Are you sure about that? Oh yeah. Oh,
that's a great backstory.
Yeah, there's
What is it?
John was just super impressed with my pretty skanky trainers at the time. So he's like, "Yeah, you roll with a pretty good posse." And I'm like, "Yep." And I get a really large shirt. Green shirt.
Having played in the NFL for a long time, I have a certain spider sense for,
Horse?
Yeah, for women that fall within what we call a target-rich environment. And Robb rolls up, and I'll tell you this, Robb rolls up with these girls, and like my spider sense went through the roof, and I like look at Robb, and I was like, oh. My spider sense is going out of control.
Is that what guys call it? Their spider sense?
That's what I call it, spider sense. My spidey sense goes crazy, and I mean the fact.
Saying your tube snake sense would be go say that. So
well, like I'm not good at many things, but I'll tell you this: the spider sense for loose moral women is pretty spot on. And so Robb turns, he's like, God, I'm like, I'm telling you, man, the NFL will teach you a few things. One, it's how to spot girls like that, So. Yeah,
like God love you, sir. Your radar is finely tuned. So,
yeah. But yeah, we had a good time, and that was we really. I think out of that conversation, a lot of what you guys, really the first conversation with a lot of the diet stuff that we really put out for a lot of the early power athlete stuff really came out of that initial meeting, and then also what you guys see for a lot of the training, because unfortunately. As I was training for the NFL to go back and I decided to do my games, I really had to move my training over to some real classic CrossFit. And then, while I did okay at the games, it didn't really pay super good dividends for me when I went to training camp. I was probably a little tired, to say the least. So we came back. I was like, oh, okay, I think I know how to do this CrossFit football stuff. So that was a real good eye opener. And also, trying to race Chris Spieler in burpees and pull-ups. Never a good idea. I'm like, I'll totally win this thing. And I'm like, I look over, I'm like, so I got to beat this 5'3", 135-pound dude in burpees. Yeah, this ain't going to happen.
Didn't you throw a bar at John Birch?
No, I tried to throw a bar at, what's his name? John Brown. Because he,
okay.
Yeah, so he, I remember the first thruster deal. He's like, well, let me see one rep so I know where to judge you at. I was like, because I got this bone chip in my knee and I can't squat like, ass to ankles. I mean, I got a basic, I get about an inch or two below parallel, but like, this is the extent of it. He's like, fine, let's show it to me. So I showed it to him. All of a sudden they blow the whistle, 3, 2, 1, go. I do the first thruster and he goes, no count. And I look at the dude, I'm like, I just showed you what I could do. I mean, like, if this is the first fresh one, I'm not going to cut it. And I did like another 2 or 3 and he kept no counting me. And I looked at him and I was like, I already, basically like we just went through this. And then finally he started giving me some reps. Then we go over to do the pull-ups and we're doing the chest to bar. And, I was like pulling straight up and banging my chest against the bar and he couldn't see that. So then he's like, no, you have to hit the front part of the bar. And the whole thing fucking evaporated, dude. I shredded my palm. I think I did like 70 reps of pull-ups, 70 reps. I mean, my Fran, which I had done, which was like 340, was all of a sudden like 12 and a half minutes. And somewhere in there, I just got so mad, I fucking threw the bar. And he intelligently moved, and the bar hit John Birch and broke his toe.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so Birch was just incidental. Okay, but I still love that either way. So
yeah, I mean, he was in like a pair of like China Cho's Lululemon shorts and like a pair of like 5 fingers. And he was all like like I'm like this mock Spider-Man guy, like Ninja Warrior, but like now I'm a elite CrossFitter. So that was his vibe, and he got his toe broken. That was the end of it. So I did feel bad about that, but
so that sounds like a rough weekend. You want to talk about it?
The fucking games was fucking no joke, dude. I mean, the problem became they had the bars out in the sun, and those black bars were so fucking hot, and then the pull-ups were so hot, and they only sanded the bottom, so they didn't sand the top, and they were rusted. and I sheared off like both of my palms. Like
that's pre-elite gloves.
Well, no, it was pre. Hey, let's not fuck the competitors. Yeah, it was pre. Like, let's not fucking kill the competitors. So that was still when like the idea, like, hey, maybe we'll just kill people. So it was in the infancy of the thing known as the CrossFit Games.
Back when you guys were trying to hammer out like the power athlete diet or the CrossFit football diet, did you try like a zone approach first? Because I thought I've heard you speak about like trying that and having some insane amount of blocks that you were on, like.
Well, so when early in the CrossFit game, when you came into CrossFit, there was a few things that were like pretty standard that we've since just catapulted past. But when you came in the CrossFit deal, it was like this idea that you have to meet this standard of a 500-pound deadlift and a sub 5-minute mile, right? So I came in and I deadlifted 600 pounds, and they were like, "Oh, you're obviously too strong. We got to get that mile time down." I'm like, "Oh, great." So the other big one was, let's figure out what your zone proportions are. And when we zoned out my calories, it was like 40 blocks. And, trying to eat like 40 blocks of spinach is a fucking disaster, because of course.
Unless you're hippopotamus, it's pretty.
Yeah. So like the 40 grams of carbs, or the 40 blocks of carbs, was absolutely fucking disaster. So I remember like looking at this and just this volume of food. I'm like, there's got to be an easier way to skin this bullshit. And that's when I hit Rob up, and he's like, "Let's do this. Why don't we drop you back to like 25 blocks and we'll add fat?" And then it became like the Robb Wolf, what we call the Robb Wolf fucking extreme tinkering to necessarily get this thing into a manageable position. So that's really where it came down to. And then as we started kind of tinkering and playing, I mean, we and Rob and I had been on this journey for, dude, it seems like eons. I feel like we went to different high schools together. We've been on this journey so long. Right. But, when we really started, it was this idea like, okay, obviously a 40-30-30, which is, by no means a high carb diet, but for most people, especially in today's paleo world, like a 40% carbohydrate is a fucking shit ton of carbs. So, I mean, we kind of started there, and then what did? We ratcheted the carbs down, we ratcheted the fat up, performance did well, and for a little bit, and then we kind of have tinkered with it. And I think at one point we were both pretty mad at the carbohydrate, where we were like, fuck carbs, we don't need them. And we kind of went in that direction. And I think we saw some negative performance gains, and people started to fry out. And then I think, now we've looked at it like, there's carbs are fuel and gas for your car. And, you don't need to overgas your tank, but if you undergas your tank, you're not getting very far. So I think we started on one extreme and went to another extreme, and then we found this kind of sweet spot in the middle. And the problem is I don't know if people bothered to steal that information from Rob and I yet. I mean, they're probably still thieving off of 2009, 2010 material. They got to get to 2014 material,
And it's so hard to get that message out there that, like, if you're metabolically broken, avoiding some dense carbs, sweet potatoes and rice and stuff like that is probably a good idea until we fix your metabolic engine. If you're a night shift cop or, police, military, fire, and you've been up for 2 days straight, you're super insulin resistant in that period of time, maybe we just do a protein and fat meal and some veggies. And then after you get some exercise in, then we throw some carbs into the post-workout period. It's some really important nuance that seems super hard to get people fired up about. People see these weight loss stories of somebody who's like type 2 diabetic and they're 100 pounds overweight and they lose all this weight going low carb. And that's fantastic. But then you have these people rolling into the CrossFit scene or MMA or, something that's pretty glycolytically demanding, pretty glycogen demanding. And they're at like 10% body fat and they want to be 5% body fat. And they're like, well, if I go zero carb and I do CrossFit 6 days a week, then this will be great. And it's like, yeah, it'll be great for the functional medicine doc that needs to repair your adrenals and testosterone levels and everything else, because you're going to be a smoldering slag heap. So, John and I think we mapped this, and, every part of this map, we've been there and kind of sniffed around and nosed around. And I feel like we've got a pretty good rubric for like, okay, if A doesn't work, then we'll go to B. If B doesn't work, then we'll go to C. And we're able to kind of rattle people into a pretty good spot.
You know, and you know what Rob's really talking about is I think people want this one size fits all approach, and you know, hey, I just want this program, I want this extreme diet, I want this, and I want to follow these to the letter, and I want the results at the end of the rainbow. And the problem is we're this organic decaying matter, and unfortunately, there's no such thing as a one size fits all approach. And I think that's what's really cool, especially with like the Field Strong stuff, for example, where you know you bring in this generalist program, and here's a guy like Robb who's following a version of Field Strong, but he does his jiu-jitsu, and Rob's, you know, in terms of recovery, Rob's on the small monkey side, where you know he can handle intensity, but too much volume fries him. So we write a program that you know is dose related and really you know very specific in the amount of volume he gets, and it allows him to push his intensity. And he just you know mixes it up with a lot of his sport specific jiu-jitsu training, and that's really what he wants to be good at. So we had to design a program that fit around his needs instead of being like, hey, I'm just gonna fucking randomly train for stuff. No, like Robb is a very specific athlete. And like you said, you know, high school state powerlifting champ. I mean, obviously extremely fast twitch. I mean, you got a 170-pound guy that's training a couple days a week who's not a powerlifting athlete anymore, more of a jiu-jitsu guy now. And he's doing, you know, what would you say, 420 for a triple? Like a fast triple on the back squat. 425. So, you know, Robb is extremely fast twitch. And anytime we've ever trained and ever worked together, I mean, you look at, and we talked about this a little yesterday on our roundtable, that to be good at something like CrossFit, you have to have a conversion of fast twitch, slow twitch fibers just to survive a longer type deal. I mean, you can't bring somebody in that's predominantly fast twitch and put them into a CrossFit deal and not expect them to implode themselves. So, then does that really pay dividends for certain sports? And you can kind of start looking at this stuff about, you know, obviously building an aerobic capacity, GPP, SPP, and you kind of start building all these pyramids. But, it ultimately comes down to what is working for your athlete, what's going to specifically work for Robb Wolf as a unique individual, what program works for him, what fits within his demands. I mean, he's also a dad. He's got another kidlet on the way, which, you know, I'm telling you, man, it all changes after number 2. So. But
dude, it all changed after number 1. That almost killed me. I when Nikki told me she wanted a second kid and a dog, I'm like, so did you double my life insurance and you're just trying to kill me? Like,
what kind of dog did you get? Whoa! What kind of dog did you guys get?
Oh no, I told her that we're not. I said if you want a dog also in this mix, that's with the other husband. That's with your next husband. I basically drew the line at that. A cat was all I could do, and then. The cat ended up being a little bit of a disaster too. The cat pisses all over the house, so it's amazing. So.
Oh, you got another new gato.
We have a new one for about a year. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah,
Long live Keystone's memory, though. Yes.
I'll tell you. I think if I could go back, I would have just had dogs. The dogs are way easier than the kid. I mean, I can just lock Louis up in the crate, or he goes outside and walks around outside in the backyard. Whereas the kids are, this morning at 5:45 in our bathroom, opening and closing the door, like cracking it 1 inch and then slamming it, opening and cracking it. And finally, I was like, "Stop opening and closing the door!"
Yeah, Louis is great. He shits on the turf every time he comes here. So
that's a lot better than shitting on in a diaper and then having to clean that thing up. I'll bring in one of those presents one time.
Bring it when it's just been overloaded, because you're gambling. You're like, okay, the diaper's full of piss, but she took shit this morning, so I think we've got a window of time here. I'm cool. I'll just do one more stop and then I'll change the diaper in the back of the rig. And then that was a tactical error, and you basically got shit from the back of their head all the way to their shoelaces. It's in the car seat.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Is Zoe potty trained right now?
No. It's funny. Like, I honestly think that she could probably do differential calculus right now, but she's just like, I am completely uninterested in potty training. Like, I've sat down on her little blue, little girl potty, and I've taken a dump and I've taken a piss, and we've take that stuff and dump it in the toilet and everything. And she's like, yeah, that's great. I'm good though. I don't want to do it.
I think it's a power move. I mean,
that's what our pediatrician Yeah.
You know, the Killy was hilarious. Like when we started, like the first day we even really like entertained and started like got her own potty and kind of looked at it. She was more just enamored by the fact that she would get to wear undies. So we had this book that was like, you know,
Big girl panties.
Yeah, big girl panties. So we're reading her big girl panties, the book, and Keely like looked at it and saw the panties, and she like looked at all of them and was like, "I'm in." And that was the end of it. Like literally, was like from that day forward, it was like, "I want to wear underwear. I don't want to, you know, these are way cooler than the diaper." Whereas Jamie kind of fought it a little bit, but then I think Killy kind of shamed her into it a little bit. So,
yeah, we're hoping that with the arrival of the second kid that we'll be able to shame Zoe a little bit. Like, yeah, diapers are really dirty and they're for babies, and then we'll work that thing. I don't know, man. Oh no, we'll see.
Is she's talking pretty well and like, you know, holding conversations and just blah, blah, blah.
She's talking, you know, it's kind of crazy. So Big Girl Panties is actually reasonably fun to read. You get some other books that are horrible to read, and somebody bought her this like Walt Disney storybook deal, but it also has this little tablet that's this interactive thing where she pushes different icons on it, and it's supposed to work interactively with the book. It's a little bit advanced for her, but reading the book without the tablet sucks. Like, it's just so moronic. You're just like, oh my God, I'm going to die. But it has, you know, just a bunch of different pictures. They're kind of color coded or whatever. But the other day I was just looking at this thing. I'm like, okay, how do I make this fun for me? And so there's a bunch of pictures on the page, and I asked Zoe, I'm like, hey Zoe, what's hot on that page that we would want to be careful with? And she pointed to a cup of coffee. She's all, coffee, hot. And I'm all, wow. And then, gosh, there were a couple of things like that. There was a picture of a doghouse, and I'm like, so with about 18 other things on this paper. But I was like, Zoe, where would the gato like to sleep? And she's all, the doghouse. And I was just, it was really interesting. It's contextual stuff, you know, and she's like 26 months old, and I don't know anything about child development, but like the contextual understanding that she had for a bunch of this stuff. I was like, Zoe, if the ground was hot, what would you want on this page? And she's all, shoes.
Oh wow!
And did you ask her? So why are you still shitting your pants?
No, I didn't take that leap actually. Apparently pushing the potty training thing too hard can cause kids to really hunker in, and so we've been taking a pretty light approach with that. The closest that I've gotten with this is that I told Zoe, I'm like, hey, if you sit down and go potty, I'll give you some chocolate. We give her some 90% dark chocolate. And she sat down there, and but she refused to take her diaper off. So she sat down with the diaper on, and then proceeded to take a dump. And she fully, it was like, oh, okay, so you're going to be a lawyer and a physicist.
Totally, yeah.
Dude, Rob, I was laughing your story about the ad on Facebook where you're like, you know, we feed this kid, you know, this like killer diet. And we gave her like a cookie on Christmas, and like 6 months later, she's still asking for the cookie. I think it was Sunday, we drove up to LA to go to some place to, of course, like look at some patio furniture, which is exactly what every guy wants to do on a Sunday. You know, drive up to LA and look at patio furniture. And you know, on the way up there, the kids were, you know, in the back, and they were doing pretty good. And I was like, hey, you know what? Like, there's a really killer gluten-free bakery up near this place, so let's go up there and we'll get them something. So we pull up, and it's pretty like small little spot. So Kate's like, we'll just go in and get them something. So I come in, I get them was it like a carrot cake cupcake and like a brownie. So I come out, and it's got this killer cream cheese frosting, and it's like this, you know, like really like pretty renowned place up in LA. And like the kids kind of like are looking at it, and they're like, what is that? And I break them off and start doing it, giving it to them. What's today? Today is Thursday. Every single day there were like brownies, cupcake, brownies, cupcake. Like, it's like I saw Jamie got this morning, and she's like, Dad, can we have cupcakes today?
Right.
You know, it's like this very real thing, and being like, I think we should have brownies for breakfast. And I'm like these kids eat like, you know, like killer grass-fed steaks. I mean, this like insane lunch Kate makes. I mean, like, I look at all the food they eat, and it doesn't matter. It come down to like cupcakes and brownies, and like, you know, like for our birthday, we would like to have those cupcakes. I'm like, when's your birthday? They're like October 6th, and we're gonna have those brownies, right? I'm like, oh
it's
God.
like a heroin. And you know, my whole point when I did that post, it was actually in a way, it was kind of absolving people of the responsibility and the guilt of shitty food. Like this was kind of what I was driving at, which was you get these hyper palatable foods. Like if you follow Stefan Guillenet or some of these folks that are in like the food reward kind of pathway, view of like overeating and stuff like that. It was kind of absolving people responsibility. It's like, hey, we evolved eating these foods. These other foods are novel, and they can send a signal to the brain that just completely overwhelms what we're used to. And look at how this manifests in my kid. And I thought that this was really insightful. And it would kind of absolve people of this responsibility. The fucking response I got on my Facebook page, and I'll go ahead and say it on here, and people will burn me at the stake, or maybe we'll burn you guys at the stake because it's your show. But it was all of the overweight women got on there and were just chewing on me, and they're like, well, she's not attached to the cookies because of hyperpalatability. It was because of Santa Claus and Christmas and all the nostalgia associated with that. She's fucking a year old. Her brain is not that developed. You don't have nostalgia yet. You don't have the good old days that you reminisce about, And I was just like, Jesus Christ, you people are morons. Like I'm trying to get you the get out of jail free card for like feeling like a bastard or some sort of failure because you're addicted to these foods, and then you actually turn it around and make me want to hate you. So it was incredible, man.
Oh, I know. Like I saw the post and I commented, and I was like, I've seen it in my own kids. I mean, we talk about it like and like that nostalgia thing kind of makes a little bit of sense too, but like obviously not for that because we went out for Mexican food the other day, and as we were in the little taco place, like picking up tacos, they had like behind the counter in a glass thing, they had like the Cokes, like the Hecho en Mexico Cokes, like the Mexican Coke, like the real syrup.
Right.
And I saw them and I was like, oh God, those were so good. Because I remember back in, when we go to Mexico when I was a kid, like on vacation, back when like Mexico was actually, kind of safe and fun and like actually like a cheap vacation. We'd go down there and, you fucking a quarter for one of those things, and we'd slam like 7 of them at dinner, And but man, they were pretty good. And I saw those and I was like, man, those things are so good. I'm like, too bad my kids will never know what the Mexican Coke tastes like, at least not on my deal. And on the drive home, I called my brother. I was like, dude, you remember those Mexican Cokes? He's like, oh my God. He goes, I see him now. And so he bought one for my nephew. And he's like, my nephew Luke was drinking, and he's like, Dad, you used to drink these things? He's like, your brother John and I used to crush these things when we did, But that post kind of blew me away a little bit, in that I was so surprised at how people responded to it, where it's like, hey, dude, there's a definite connection between serotonin and the pleasure senses, and I mean, and like this type of sugar, and frankly, the shit does taste good. I really wish I could pull a Lalonde and be like, it tastes terrible. You're like, Lalonde, F you. It tastes good. Just fucking admit it, Like between consuming 27 duck eggs and having a cookie, like, are you telling me the duck eggs are better? Oh, this 100% chocolate is way too sweet for me. I'm like, he says shit like that. I'm like, Lalonde, I just want to punch you in the face because that stuff does not taste sweet.
Oh, man. It was funny, though. I was trying to de-emotionalize food, and then people drug it right into like the emotional, slaughterhouse, sewer, gutter, whatever, like the Dante's 8th level of hell of emotionality. And I'm just like, okay, fuck you assholes. Like I just, you can't, you just never win. You just never win trying to help people.
And you never win. Like, it seems like as much good as you do, there's always somebody to fry you at the stake. And there was probably somebody on there that was like, you should be ashamed of yourself feeding your child that, knowing what it can do. And you're like, oh God. So what am I supposed to do? Like, lock my kid in a fucking cave somewhere and feed them nuts and berries for the rest of their life? I mean, at some point they're going to go out. Like, poor Kate, like yesterday at school, they had a deal for the girls where they were going to make trail mix at their school. So, the kids are obviously, gluten-free. So the teacher calls and it's like, hey, the kids are going to make trail mix. Can you bring in some not, gluten-free corn checks or something, or rice checks? So like poor Kate goes and buys all this like organic stuff and like brings in like the chocolate chips and, goes and brings it in. And so she goes back to pick it up, and they made the trail mix with all her stuff, and they didn't like make any of the trail mix with all the other stuff the parents brought. So I was like, hey, Kate, I was like, did you bring home any of the trail mix? The stuff looked awesome. She's like, no, they ate all of our trail mix. I was like, what about the other people? She's like, no, it was still sitting there. The teachers probably saw it. They were like, oh, look at this all organic, gluten-free stuff. Let's eat this stuff. And they made all that, and that's what the kids ate. So I'm awesome. Like, I'm like, great, let's buy more trail mix. But
So, is there any power athlete question that we have the genius, the brain, the high school state powerlifting champion in the state of California on that we need to know? And
you know it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was thinking a little bit about it, and I'm sure right now one of our 3 listeners is thinking to himself, summer is coming. I want to lean out and lose body fat, but I only sleep 2 hours a night. I don't want to eat any carbs, and I train 14 times a week. And my diet's really not that good. I smoke cigarettes.
John, I'm right here.
I can hear you.
I can hear you. That's hurtful.
Yeah, it's hurtful. Well, Callie's on the 800 calorie a day diet. And,
that is not true. That's actually not true. I eat more than these guys here because they actually are trying to lean out. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to bulk up.
Jump in the front, honey.
Exactly.
Callie did
a body like this doesn't happen on accident, people.
Callie's actually rocking some pretty impressive Daisy Dukes today, except it looks like she stole some guys' jeans because they're actually baggy Daisy Dukes, which I've never seen before. She's
well, I know. I can't help it.
Just grow. It's like me buying a bigger shirt, and I'm like, I'll grow into it.
Thanks for noticing.
you see, she's actually competing with Chelsea for in Daisy Duke department.
Yeah, we're competing for quad space here, actually.
Well, actually, Chelsea tried to steal Kelly's shorts to turn into Daisy Dukes, but I wouldn't let her cut them up.
Yeah, can't believe it. Chelsea wears the tightest clothes I've ever seen. I think you're just looking at my shorts and comparing them to what you know and you've seen on Chelsea. And Chelsea, like, you can't, I don't even understand how she puts them on.
Well, yeah, with Crisco, you got to slip into those things.
Anyway, this was not pertaining to any of the questions from Power Athlete Nation.
So let's get into this thing. So Rob, I sleep 2 hours a night. I mean, and I know you've heard these questions. I mean, there was a guy on our forums last night that was like, hey, I'm really intrigued. Like, the power athlete stuff is great. Having a kid. I have some time, but I don't really have time to sleep. And I remember I looked at that question. I was like, I didn't really understand sleep deprivation and the negative effects of training, physique, health, and just all around mental well-being until I had the twins and only slept for no more than 45 minutes for 3 months at any one point. And whenever people ask me about it, my always deal for expecting fathers is the same thing, Rob. Sleep is almost more important than getting your workout in. Like, the last thing you want to do is be fucking totally sleep deprived and then go in and torture yourself in the weight room.
Yeah, and I mean, it was kind of ironic as a gym owner that pretty quickly I figured out that the food and the sleep and the lifestyle was where the money was, and that the exercise was actually just smoke and mirrors, and almost like the Pavlovian deal to keep the person to come back. It had almost nothing to do with what their goals were. I mean, clearly it does at some point, but I saw this observationally, particularly again within the CrossFit scene, because there was a big cross section of police, military, fire, and I would just get this same email again and again and again. It's like, hey, I eat a perfectly weighed, measured paleo zone deal, a 3 on 1 off, blah, 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 and I can't lean out. And my question back to him was like, are you police, military, or fire? And like 85, 90% of the time, they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm this, that, or the other. And I'm like, okay, as long as you're doing shift work and your sleep's fucked up, then you're a lost cause pretty much. And then if it wasn't that, then I would ask, when did the new baby arrive? And then that was like the 100% deal. It never wasn't a sleep related issue with these folks that were otherwise like getting after the training pretty good. And they weren't doing something patently moronic with their food, like going way too low carb, or I see that you guys have a bulletproof coffee deal here a little bit later, doing something completely moronic. Then it was sleep. And it's You know,
can you just put into like layman's terms why sleep is so important? What effect it has on metabolism?
Oh God, it has. So it's some interesting studies. You can use this thing called a microarray, which basically maps the way that genes are turned on and off in your body. And with one night of short sleep, you alter the expression of about 700 different genes.
Define short sleep.
Like waking up with, if you should go to bed and wake up without an alarm, feel rest.
Okay.
If you wake up with an alarm, if you're disturbed sleep throughout the night, you're waking up with rapid heart rate and night sweats and all that because your adrenals are totally cooked, then we've got problems. So it's basically, ideally you go to bed kind of early, you wake up early-ish. Teenagers are a little bit of an exception with that because their circadian rhythm actually alters so that they're legitimately going to bed at like 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock and at 12, midnight or 1 a.m. getting up later, but otherwise most people are a little bit more tied into photo period and sunlight exposure. But when you don't sleep, you don't aggregate your memories. You don't clean out the toxic junk that builds up in your brain. You become insulin resistant. Your gut microbiome gets messed up. It's really what short sleep is. When you look at all of the effects of aging, being short slept is a micro dose of accelerated aging. Everything that you see with aging, loss of muscle mass, loss of immune function, loss of memory, pro-inflammatory, loss of insulin signaling, that's what you're doing when you short sleep yourself.
I remember when we really got into this whole sleep deal and really started kind of going down this path, and I think Rob and I really saw it on the first hand because we both had kids about the same time. Like I remember calling Rob after, like, I think it was probably about 2 or 3 months in when the girls had just started sleeping through the night. It was kind of like normalizing a little bit. I remember I sat back in my chair and I leaned back and all of a sudden the chair cut in and I was like, what the fuck is this on my back? And it was actually back fat. And I called Rob and I was like, dude, I never had back. Where did this come from?
Was it near your bra line?
Yeah, it was right there. It was right. Oh, Callie obviously hasn't been sleeping.
That's my lat. Don't hurt your hand. That's my lat.
And I remember being like, what the fuck is that? I called Robbie and I was like, Robbie, I got this back fat. And he's like, welcome to fatherhood. And so we were laughing. He's like, I got it too. And it was one of those deals where, the sleep deprivation really kind of played really interesting tricks on some stuff. And it's, as we started kind of going down this path and started really researching sleep, his deal, what he just said about the controlled aging is really became the dividing factor. And I think people really under realize, and I know when I went and worked with Dr. Jin and really talked to him about it and that ability to sleep within the circadian rhythm, get to bed before, in bed before 9:30 and sleep and then have like a uninterrupted deal. And I know for me personally, what has done worlds of difference for my sleep was sleeping with a mouthpiece. So I actually had a mouthpiece made and it actually puts my jaw in a more neutral position. And I go from not even waking up perfectly rested, having a complete sleep to all of a sudden waking up a couple times a night, jaw clicking and problems. So as I started kind of researching a little bit of that, people that have obviously had some, jaw trauma or, have TMJ or different things, run into some issues with sleep. And it's pretty fascinating, just the performance stuff. And I remember a couple years ago when I went to go do the talk at AHS out in Boston. I think this was 2 years ago. I gave a talk on food and performance, and it was really just the kind of early power athlete stuff I'd done with AJ Roberts, and also a talk that I'd had with Stan Efferding, who Stan at the time was or is a pro bodybuilder and held the world record in raw powerlifting. I mean, super strong dude. And I remember rapping with him a little bit about his diet and coconut oil and how he kind of schemed his diet. And the biggest one he said is it's sleep is my biggest weapon. I was like, well, how much do you sleep? And he's like, honestly, he goes, I try to get somewhere like 14 to 16 hours a day of sleeping. He goes, when I was training, and he goes, at my most muscular, when I, he went out and trained with Flex Wheeler and, basically went and lived with Flex Wheeler, and Flex got him ready to win, to win his pro card. And he goes, literally, they would hit the gym and like start warming up. And like after they got done warming up, they had 45 minutes to get their workout in. After that 45 minutes was done, they would go eat and go to sleep, and then, you know, sleep for 3 hours, come back, and it was like no more than 45 to 60 minutes. And they try to sleep like 14 to 16 hours. And so when I was talking with them, I was like, this guy's a fucking lion. Like,
yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, I made that kind of connection in my head, and I was like, and if you look at the dude, he looks like a fucking lion. I mean, they call him the white rhino because the dude is, you know, fucking super jacked and super strong. And, you know, his ability to like be able to sleep that much. And I remember being like, dude, I don't know how. I mean, you know, you either get fired or divorced. You got to be independently wealthy and, you know, not be married to be able to sleep that many hours. But there's an example where the guy, you know, eats perfect, super strong, and was logging so many hours. And then as I went back in time, I started remembering when I got injured and tore my patellar tendon in '99. You know, I rehabbed that whole year, and then that off season, I remember that's when I started working with Dr. Dave Pasquale, and Mara was like, you know, hey, I want you to train twice a day, and I want you to sleep as much as humanly possible. And I think I was sleeping, you know, like I'd sleep 12 hours, and I was, you know, probably taking another, 2 naps that were about, 90 minutes. And it was probably one of the biggest and strongest I've ever been. So, I mean, there's definite performance gains. And I think people really underestimate sleep as, performance enhancing and just, really for sanity and everything else. So it's unfortunately, it's one of those things that people are like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And I had that same attitude, oh yeah, I mean, I don't need sleep. I'm too tough for that stuff. And now I realize that, sleep is probably the last frontier that we're just starting to understand the performance.
It shouldn't be. It should be as hard to sell sleep as it is to sell sex. Like, it should not be a hard sell at all, but it really, really is. And it for a return on investment kind of gig, I just can't find too many things that will trump it ever. And Doc Parsley has some great stuff, where they'll get computer programmers. They're writing lines of code and they're looking at the error rate, so how productive are you and how much error rate is associated with that. And they will short sleep these people like an hour a night. And then by the 4th or 5th day of doing this, these people are literally 50% less productive versus if they just slept more. So people start, they think, well, I'll just short sleep here. I'll do this, I'll do that. I'll be more productive. I'll get something done. And clearly, like, deadlines, pop up and you have to get projects done and everything, and you have to sacrifice sleep for that. But on a day in, day out basis, if you want to be more productive, just sleep more and then work less, because the time that you spend working will actually be productive. That's one of the kind of goofy things about the standard, like, 8-hour workday, where you just have to clock in versus like getting paid based off of like what you actually get done. Like, if people were well rested and they could get done in 2 hours what they normally get done in 8 hours, and they could get the fuck out of Dodge and go live the rest of their life, and it would be pretty good. So there's good argument for trying to do stuff like that.
Productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. No, it's I always think about it too. Like, I'm sure you guys follow different people on Twitter and Instagram, and I always follow The Rock on Instagram, and he's always got these pictures. We always do. The Rock's like
You mean Hercules?
Our mascot for Power Athlete HQ. We're pretty soon, at some point, we're going to get The Rock on our podcast, and I think that's when we'll reach Nirvana.
I'm working on it.
But it's always like, yeah, I'm in the gym, just getting it going at 3:30 in the morning, and you're like, fuck you.
He's like, sleeping's for babies.
Yeah, and then there's another guy I follow on Twitter, Instagram, who Callie's a big fan of. And the guy's like, yeah, in the gym, just getting it pumping. Already got the cardio done, ready to start banging weights, and it's 4:30 in the morning. And I'm like, I always look at these guys, and I'm all, fuck you. I'm like, you know what time for me to be in the gym by 4:30 in the morning? I'd have to be up at 4. That means I'd have to be in bed by like 7:30 to 8 o'clock. So I pretty much have to be in bed at the same time my kids are, which would make it extremely hard to get anything done later on. So I always see that stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, sleep's for the weak,
They're making time to tweet, that's for sure.
No, what I'm pretty sure they're doing is they're taking pictures at like 4 or 5 o'clock at night, and they're like, yeah, it's 4:30 in the morning. I'm like, there's no way, dude. I was like, I remember in college when we used to, our training started at 6 in the morning, and we were up at 5, and we had to be there at like, and everybody's done that. I mean, I remember for years, and training at 6, it's like,
like the quality of your work is just so much better when you can, because ultimately, even if you're training at 6 and you're, live a normal life, you're still going to be going to bed at 11 or 12. It's just getting those extra few hours is such a difference.
Here's an interesting thing that Dr. Wesley threw to me a couple of days ago. Apparently in the 1900s, schools in the United States started typically around 9 or 9:30 a.m., whereas European schools started about 7:30 a.m. And that was because the more industrialized European countries, they had to cater to the work schedule that these people had, which is much what we do with our kids' schedules today and school schedules and whatnot. But there was something like a 30-point IQ spread between the United States students and the European students. And somebody at the time had written about this stuff, like they had researched the sleep a little bit. And they said, so long as we always start our schools later than other country schools, we will always have a cognitive advantage on these people. And then we basically stuff around for our schedule. It's really, really interesting.
That is quite the absolute.
Wow.
And Parsley made this point that, like, for most kids, expecting them to be on point at like 7:30 or 8 a.m., and expecting them to like learn and just basically be, have all cylinders firing would be like expecting us to be firing on all cylinders at like 3:30 or 4:30 a.m.
You would think Californians would be more productive then, because they don't start until around 10:30, 11, and then they leave. Okay. They leave around 2.
But the other one I love, which will throw the ninja blow dart into this one, is as a kid in school, I used to get in trouble because I used to fall asleep in that first period, and I used to always like feel really sluggish going to school and real tired. And I remember it was after working with Robb and getting my blood work done. I remember the first time I talked to Robb, I was like, we started talking about gluten and all that. I was like, oh yeah, I got a real bad allergy to that stuff. I've known that for years. I get tested, and so we started kind of talking a little bit. And I remember when I first got my blood work done by Yankee, he was like, oh, you're super allergic to gluten. And he kind of like laid out, it was like corn, and he kind of went through this whole deal. And I was like, oh, allergy. I was like, well, how would I know I was allergic to him? He's like, when you eat those foods, do you get real tired or have to go to the bathroom or feel sick? And like instantly it was like one of those movies where you like mentally time portal back to like 4th grade, where you're like sitting in like first period class, and you're just like fighting to keep your eyes open, and you're like, oh God, I'm so tired. What's wrong? I felt great when I got up this morning, and now I'm so tired I can't even listen. And you think it's just like school sucking the life out of you.
But
and then
your mom
all of a sudden,
you with gluten?
all of a sudden, I go back to like 30 minutes before that, as my dad's like, you got to start every day with whole grains, as he would pour this like monster bowl of grape nuts in like milk, and then of course cover it with non-fat milk, because you don't want extra fat, because that'll be bad for you. And having this like, oh, and then what's even better? I'm going to cut this whole banana of slices on top, and there I am with this like massive 2 cups of grape nuts, a cut up banana, and probably a pint of non-fat milk. And that was my breakfast. And then like, as I like all of a sudden time portal back in my brain, and I'm like, fuck. I'm like, no wonder I was sound asleep. I'm like, dude, you're totally just fucking overloaded, packed me full of carbs and sugar. And then I'm in a total insulin diabetic coma crash in first period. And on top of it, I'm already allergic to the stuff. So I remember calling my dad up. I was like, yeah, you and your whole grains. Enough on that one. So yeah, that's, and then my dad, I remember like talking to him later. He's like, how did I know? They said it was, nutritious. You see all the boxes. I'm like, oh God. Like, that's how I'm like, so you don't think America's been lying to us for all these years? Jeez.
Dude, weren't doctors at some point paid to endorse Lucky Strikes cigarettes?
Yes.
Like most doctors surveyed prefer Lucky Strikes. So, yeah.
Well, the other one too, and I remember Robb and I, talking about this food for performance, and we kind of started going down this road, and then Robb made a funny comment. He's like, well, John, you ate, your dad basically pumped you full of grape nuts and cereal every morning, and ate this kind of traditional higher carb diet like deal, and you still got to go play in the NFL. Yeah. So, I was like, you're right. So what you're saying is that you can, if the genetics are good enough, you can fucking out-genetic some stuff. I'm like, well, there could have been an easier way to do it. He's like, yeah, it definitely was. And I remember those were some of our early conversations. But yeah, to this day, I still, every time I see my dad, I'm like, whole grains.
Hey, Denny, did we have a question on fish oil and CLAs?
Well, you know what? That goes back to like an email thread between Steve and myself, and well, I was on it. It was actually between Steve and John, and then John reached out to Rob. But Steve had asked John, like at the time Steve was just like heavily dosed on fish oil, and then just ran out, didn't go get some more, and he felt that his joints actually started feeling better. And then in that communication, he had asked John, like, is this common? Is there a different route I can take? And then it looked like John referred that email to Rob, and Rob, you kind of replied saying that there was some like studies with CLAs kind of versus fish oil, but we're talking that email could have been a year ago. There didn't seem to be enough like data to kind of support if that was true or not. And I was curious if you had, since then, have you seen anything that kind of support that, or has your opinion changed on that, CLA's benefits versus like fish oil benefits?
Well, I mean, it's two totally different things in a lot of ways. So, with the CLA is kind of working on that omega-6 arachidonic acid family of fats. It's interesting. You get CLA a lot from grass-fed dairy and from grass-fed meat. So it has some anti-tumor properties, has some kind of muscle building, anabolic properties. It's really interesting. There's 9 different isomers within that conjugated linoleic acid family. So certain isomers are biologically active and have some benefit. Others don't really do all that much of anything. But two very different stories versus the fish oil thing. And, again, this is where you try to take the best information that you have at the time and run with it. And when I was working on my book, looking around at different studies, it seemed like pretty high dose fish oil was beneficial. Barry Sears was a big fan of fish oil. I was trying to, as much as possible, stay in the good graces of my current employers at that time. So as much bone as I could throw towards Barry Sears was good. So high dose fish oil seemed like a good thing. And then the Kraken and some other folks, we started really sitting down and looking at the rate at which you can actually add these fatty acids to your cell membranes and how they can get incorporated into your body. And there was really a significant rate limiting step due to a particular enzyme. And even if you're someone John's size, like doing more than about 4 to 5 grams of EPA DHA per day wasn't really going to do all that much other than pump that stuff straight into your mitochondria and be used as a highly reactive oxygen species generating fuel, basically like a pro-oxidant kind of story. And so, initially I recommended pretty high dose fish oil. Now I've really modified that down somewhere between the 2 to 4 grams a day deal. If you're generally doing grass-fed meat and eating some wild-caught fish, and you're not doing like tons and tons of poor quality fats from like canola oil, salad dressing, and stuff like that, you may not really need to supplement at all. And because these, the EPA in particular modifies all of the prostaglandin and these pro-inflammatory pathways out of the delta 6 desaturase kind of metabolic pathway, it can affect inflammation in just wacky ways. There's some pretty good studies indicating that fish oil supplementation in folks with colitis, it may actually make it worse. And so it's really important, again, like John talked about just with programming, it's really important to take some basic ideas about mechanism and maybe use that as a starting point, but then just take each person individually and look at the way that they actually respond to a protocol. So the reduction in fish oil reducing joint inflammation isn't at all surprising, because maybe this person was getting enough dietarily and there wasn't an imbalance there. And then as far as the CLAs go, there's some data that suggests that CLA is beneficial from an anti-tumor standpoint, some immunomodulatory standpoints, and also helping with muscle accretion. but it's again, if you're getting grass-fed meat, doing some grass-fed dairy, if you tolerate the grass-fed dairy, then you're probably getting significant amounts of CLA from that, and I don't know that you would really need to supplement.
We had a guy at our seminar a couple of years ago that and just like everything else, people see one thing and they kind of fucking take it to the extreme. And Rob at the time had that kind of fish oil calculator out there, which everybody kind of ran with, and of course, at the end spectrum, it was like, if you are sick, metabolically broken, deranged, I mean, all of this, like at most you should be taking X. And it was like, whatever it was. We had a guy come to our seminar that was like, yeah, I'm taking 30 grams of fish oil a day. Do you think that's bad? And I was like, how's that working out for you? And he's like, well, I had a deal where I was actually getting ready the other day and I nicked myself shaving and I had to go to the ER because I almost fucking bled out. And I was like, well, yeah, it's a blood thinner. So technically, you were just like, snorting aspirin all day. And the guy was like, yeah, I got kind of nervous. I mean, they couldn't get it to clot. I literally was nervous and they had to, go to some pretty aggressive steps and they, glued it shut. And he's like, yeah, I cut that back. I was like, oh, well, at least you learn from your mistakes. But, I was like, anytime you see like the most extreme stuff and, and that's a problem we run into, especially in this, whether it be the kind of paleo scene, CrossFit scene, or really anything, is you get a lot of type A personalities. And usually the type A personalities are either the early adopters or the first ones to fucking spin out. So you see like a lot of early adopters that are kind of type A and, just and this becomes a lot of the danger too when you start, writing, a lot of this, random programming stuff. You put type A personalities, like for example, you bring like a bunch of military guys and you show them something like a SEAL fit, and they're like, great, I'm going to do SEAL fit 3 times a day because that's going to be the most challenging thing I can do, and on the weekends I'm going to run 100 miles. And then they wonder why they implode after a short period of time. And it's like, you can't always put that type A personality that's going to go and gravitate towards the most difficult stuff. You just almost have to kind of protect them from themselves. And I remember, Rob and I both worked a lot with the military, and we worked a lot with Naval Special Warfare. And, my talk for those guys was like, I always give the analogy of Robin Williams and Matt Damon at Good Will Hunting, where he like puts his arm around him. He's like, it's not your fault, Will. And he's like, not you. And he starts crying. I'm like, it's not you guys' fault. Like I'm Robin Williams, you guys are Will Hunting, and I'm telling you, it's not your fault. This is who you guys are. This is the personality type that's allowed you to be successful at your job. The problem is now you need somebody that's almost going to pull you back and be like, hey guys, this is what I need you to do for your diet. This is what I need you to do for your training. Because if I leave it up to you, you guys are going to fucking implode yourselves because of who you are and necessarily, what you guys do. You just need somebody that's looking out for you a little bit and telling you it's not your fault, but you know what? Well, we'll get through this. It'll be okay. And I think that's what Rob and I have really, I think, if anything, I think we've been pretty good about showing people that, like, it doesn't have to be, full tilt boogie. It doesn't have to be the most extreme stuff, because a lot of the people that we're running into now, obviously, when you meet people that need some boots to the ass, we're there to give it to them. But like, a lot of these people, man, and a lot of people that follow, my training and a lot of Rob stuff, it's just, they fucking go down the rabbit hole. And you're like, dude, everything's about balance, man. Like, pull it back a little bit. Like, don't go full this way, like peel it back. And people do that stuff. I mean, we've seen it big in the paleo community too, where people just fucking go off the deep end and, they're losing their mind about 1 gram of sugar in something, and Rob and I have gotten emails forever being like, sugar is not paleo. And I'm like, well, processed sugar is not paleo, but I'm sure at some point honey would have been paleo. I mean, they found that stuff in the pyramids, So.
Well, and even just beyond that, like we got all this flack about like our jerky mix, and we tried like crazy to go real low salt and really low sugar, and what we ended up selling people were bags of mold, oddly enough, because sugar and salt are fucking food preservatives. So it's and the irony was that people would completely bust our balls on this stuff, and then I would ping them. I'm like, dude, do you eat apples? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, I want to throat punch you right now because you're shaking us down about like, out of 20 grams of protein, getting 3 grams of carbs from like honey or something, but then you'll sit down and eat an apple and not even think about it. It's like, okay, but it's funny, man. Trying to save people from themselves is a funny thing.
Well, I think too, a lot of this stuff is, because and I'm firmly believe this fad called the internet's going to pass. It's like pockets. It's this thing's not going to last. But I think a lot of this becomes, whether it be training, nutrition, or just so many things, there's so much information coming at people that it becomes almost to almost keep your sanity, you have to almost narrow your track. Like almost go to like a bit of an extreme, because if it's almost too general, it'll fucking overwhelm you. So, I mean, people find hey, I'm into this paleo thing. I'm going to go so hardline. So, we'd say, big P, little p, like go so big P paleo, because it's a set of ideals. Here it is. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I identify with. And I'm going to go down this, because there's so much information. There's so much variation that it almost becomes like, confusing, because there's so much noise. I mean, and then when you even get into like the strength and conditioning stuff, I mean, I thought the paleo stuff was, had a lot of variety, and it wasn't until I hit up and became buddies with John Meadows where I realized how much like craziness there is in the bodybuilding community. I mean, it's like high carb, high protein, low fat. And there's dudes that are 4% body fat that way, and then there's the low carb, high fat, high protein guys. And I mean, it's like I take this supplement, you do that. I mean, it's like everybody, there's all every possible combination of something is done, from high intensity interval training to, high density, low vol. I mean, every training system you could imagine, and you have 5 guys step on stage and they all look pretty much the same. And you're like, how are all these dudes shredded? And everybody does it, everybody subscribes to something different. So
yeah, Denny, this could be a good segue to Jake's question.
Yeah, he asked in the forums, it was pertaining to type 1 diabetics, training for work capacity. He had asked that a person following a type 1 diabetic who follows a program like Field Strong, are there specific levels of intensity that would elicit completely different blood glucose concentrations during or after the workout? And he was also curious to know if IGF-1 is a concern for a type 1 diabetic following a program like CrossFit Football or the Field Strong program.
Yeah, it was interesting, like the whole type 1 diabetic thing. Actually, Dutch Lowy and his girlfriend Maggie kind of got this on my radar, because she is a type 1 diabetic, started doing CrossFit, and they got these really paradoxical responses with her. Typically with exercise, whether we're talking about a type 1 or type 2 diabetic, typically what we would generally consider exercise, whether it was aerobic stuff or lifting weights, you would see blood sugar decreases from diabetics with exercise, because you increase, it's not really increasing insulin sensitivity to muscles, it's non-insulin mediated glucose transport, but basically you're creating a sink for glucose to go into, and a great way to help modulate blood glucose levels. But what was interesting, paradoxically, was that Maggie was doing CrossFit workouts, and she was ending up with just sky high blood glucose levels, like in the 250s and stuff like that, like stuff that can kill you. And with the type 1 diabetic, they've experienced some sort of an autoimmune situation where the beta cells of their pancreas have been destroyed. They're typically 100% dependent on exogenous insulin to manage their blood glucose. And usually they use some combinations of short-acting and long-acting insulin. And it was really, really paradoxical to see these big blood glucose levels post-workout. And it took me a little while to figure out what was going on, but I was kind of like, okay, stress, which, hard, intense training will elicit a stress response. A stress response releases cortisol. Cortisol causes, release of glycogen out of the liver and releases glucose into the bloodstream. And that's where this carbohydrate is coming from. That's where this blood glucose is coming from. So we started playing around with her, like doing insulin boluses before workouts and post-workout and different things like that. And we had varying degrees of success. And one thing that we had to do was we had to dramatically curtail the variability of her training, because if we were completely switching things up day to day, we had no idea what type of an insulin bolus, what type of blood glucose response you would get from a particular workout. So one, we had to really dramatically curtail the variety of the workouts that she had so that she could create a map of like, okay, if we do something that looks a lot like a Helen or a lot like a Fran or, whatever, then this is kind of the response that we get. And the way that I manage that is with this strategy, whether it was pre-workout carbs, pre-workout insulin, or, whatever. And so we were able to better manage things. But at the end of the day, the thing that I saw that really benefited her the most was just lifting weights and doing low-level cardio. And that made her ability to maintain blood glucose levels both around the peri-workout period, pre and post-workout, and also throughout the rest of the day. It just shockingly improved her ability to manage her blood glucose levels. And anything really ratcheting that intensity up made it much more challenging to manage the blood glucose levels based around the stress.
Using like heart rate as like
it's the idea that the non-media glucose uptake, like obviously like as you go to exercise, your body has that non-media glucose uptake, so it's going to blunt the insulin. But the problem becomes that when something gets so, I guess you could say like, so aggressive,
intense.
Yeah, like so intense, like there's going to be this huge cortisol release, and then cortisol is going to kind of battle that on the other side. So I mean, I know that when we worked on type 1 diabetics, big thing we were about was like, and we had them with their blood glucose meters. I mean, it was crazy. Like they would do CrossFit, and then all of a sudden they would take it, and the blood sugar would be way down. All of a sudden they would have to hit some insulin, and all of a sudden it would skyrocket, and it was just this like, and Rob saw it too. I mean, we saw this, it was like a vicious cycle, and it was like, okay, let's lift some weights. Like you said, let's, do some, low endurance and some, smaller kind of cardio type stuff. And those guys did really, really well off that.
So is it safe to say that this Feel Strong template for this type 1 diabetic is about kind of like what Rob's talking about within the realm of lifting heavy weights? But the only thing I would say is like, it sounds like to me, Rob, the girl you were working with is doing almost low intensity, low impact, like almost steady state type cardio.
Mm-hmm. Walking on a treadmill kind of a thing, or going for a walk?
About that pace, maybe a little bit more vigorous than that, maybe a real light jog, a 220 500 meter pace on the Concept 2 rower, a 210 500 meter pace on the Concept 2 rower, like easy.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I remember going back and like when you just in Flex magazine back in the 90s, like when you'd have these bodybuilders, so it's cardio day, and they're just kind of walking on a treadmill. That was their aerobic, training.
Well, I mean, I know people are going to find this is crazy, and I know this is heresy for me to say this, but for the last 60 to 70 years, people have gotten in really good shape, controlling calories, doing some fasted cardio, 30 to 60 minutes, steady state heart rate, lower aerobic capacity type cardio, and lifting weights. And I know it's crazy, but that's pretty much
aesthetically in shape. They're never.
Well, yeah. I'm saying aesthetically, like in shape. What I mean, like physically from the naked eye. Now, obviously,
people could lift some heavy weights if they needed to sprint. They could do some sprints. If they needed to do some decent cardio, they could do some decent cardio. From like a sportive fitness standpoint, or like MMA or combatives, maybe not super fit, but from a health and longevity standpoint, pretty fucking wired.
Well, I mean, and really the analogy I always go back to, and I try to read his work at least, like when I kind of lose my way a little bit, I always go back and read the Art Devaney stuff, the evolutionary fitness. And I remember Rob called me as he was just got done having dinner with Art Devaney, and Art was in his like late 70s, and you're like, dude, I just met Superman's granddad.
Yeah.
You were like, like this dude is like, he's in his 70s. He's like, he's alive. He's vibrant. He's like totally fucking aware. All of a sudden we were like in New York, and like, he like darted out into traffic and like took off and was pretty agile. And you're like, this is like Superman's granddad. This is crazy.
And if you go look at it, Art Devaney's stuff, it was, lift some weights, this, and really, if you look at Art Devaney's evolutionary fitness, I mean, I really think, and I know that's kind of where Rob got cooked up on first introduced to the CrossFit. I mean, that was really the lift some weights, run a little bit, go long, go short, kind of this constantly varied type deal. But, at the end of the day, don't ever put yourself in a place where you're, so physically exerted that you can't recover to go do your training the next day.
Rob, we did have a question that a few people wanted answered regarding naps. If you are lacking in your sleep during the nighttime, I know that the idea of sleeping a cumulative thing is well received, but what do you think about naps throughout the day? How long should they be? Where does that have its place?
Naps are phenomenal. Fit them in wherever you can. Naps tend to work on like 15-minute intervals, and if you do a little googling around like naps 15 minutes, then you'll see like there, if you want just like a quick creativity boost, then like 15 minutes is good. If you want to improve memory consolidation, short-term to long-term memory consolidation, then it's like 30 minutes, 45 minutes does some improvements in immune function, and it kind of scales out from there. So depending on how you want to what your ability and what your needs are, then you can kind of tailor napping to that. I recommend also that virtually everybody get some sort of a meditation app. I use this thing. I'm pulling it up on my phone. It's just called Brainwave. I think it was $2 on the iPhone. I'm pretty sure they've got it on Android platforms also. And using some sort of a meditation app, you'll need to plug in some headphones because it actually like modulates the sound from the right ear to the left ear, and it helps tweak brainwaves. But I use that when I get a chance to just sit down and chill out for a couple of minutes, and it actually helps me to get into a nap easier. And even if I don't fall asleep, like it really just perks me back up, and I feel a lot better with that, just even 5 minutes of it.
Yeah, I've used the same app. I've had like good experiences with it, especially trying to fall asleep at night.
Well, the idea is, and this became, I think, we teach it at the seminar, and I want to talk about sleep, about this idea of the sleep bank, and the problem becomes that, I think we're people, and we even do this with calories. Like people get so obsessed with like their daily calorie, and I'm like, you got to look at this thing on a bigger scale. That like instead of looking at it in terms of a day, you almost got to give yourself 3 days or 4 days or 5 days. If not, you're going to spin yourself out, because all of a sudden, like let's say you have a deadline, you got to meet, you're up late for some reason, something happens called life, and your sleep gets fucked up. You got to look at it like, oh, my sleep was ruined. There's nothing. No, you got to get back in there, and you're like, okay, you know what? If I'm minus 3 hours, and you know what, I got to knock out and get 3 or 4 naps to kind of even this thing out. And I mean, I do that with calories all the time. You keep a kind of track of what you're eating, and you're like, dude, I underate, I overate, and as long as I'm kind of on the average and it starts kind of working, you can kind of at least give yourself a little bit of mental reprieve and not torture yourself. And I think that's where people get so obsessed with this stuff. You're like, dude, it's a marathon, not a sprint, so let's look at this thing over a longer scale, and I think you'll get a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Man, the issue I have with like trying to get a nap in is if it's not like REM, then I kind of feel like sluggish for the rest of the day. If I'm just, if I'm not tired enough to where I can just fall into good REM sleep for like 15, 20 minutes, whatever, and I'm just kind of laying on the couch there in like that stage 1 or 2 sleep, it's like I just feel drained for, a little while, depending on if, I get some freaking coffee in me or just go coach a couple classes or something, get ramped up again. But if I could take a nap and go right into REM sleep every single time, that'd be huge.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get right into REM sleep though. Because I know a REM cycle is usually 90 minutes. So I think if you're only sleeping like a 15-minute nap, I don't think it's if you fall asleep in REM, I don't even think you get into REM in 15 minutes.
I guess the way I'm using to determine if I did is if like I had some kind of a quick dream or something.
Right.
I thought that's when you could tell that you were in REM, is if you dreamt.
It's definitely a Doc Parsley or a Dan Party question, but staying on these 15-minute intervals typically mitigates that sluggishness. So like if you've only got 15 minutes, then you set your alarm or whatever for 20 minutes and or 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever. And then it tends to kind of mitigate that. Also, I mean, if you've legitimately slept enough the night before, you may not need a nap and you may not really be able to necessarily nap. But that's where like using something like a meditation app, this is all of the, sympathetic, parasympathetic, like allostatic load type stuff where, people just don't, they give so much weight to like the being on part, but they give almost no weight to the turning off part. And whatever amount of intensity on the upslope that you have, you need to have a similar volume and intensity of downside on the downslope. And it's like, looking at a sine wave and if you've got a bunch on the upside, you need just an equal amount on the downside to be able to maintain the homeostasis is maintaining this stuff over the long period, just like John was saying, not looking at this day to day, moment to moment, but looking over the longer period. And so we will get into periods where like we have a deadline with work or we have a project that we're working on and we'll be working very, very hard on that. And then you need a block of time on the back end of that where you're in a longer extended down period. And that can be tough, but we see this a lot, again, because of the work that John and I do with police and military in particular. They are so on so much that it's really, really hard to chisel them out of the onslaught. And then when you do pull them out, they almost don't feel alive then.
Or they just start drinking.
Like they're kind of like,
Plus they're up all night.
Yeah.
And then like
most of the police I work with, they're doing their job like second shift,
Right.
So their sleep, going back to what you're talking about earlier, their sleep's all fucked up.
The guy who really and I know this is kind of a strange place to get it, but what I really didn't understand about like that kind of being on, being off, and really like how that can kind of negatively affect your training after a while. And it was actually Abadjayev. So Coach Abadjayev from the Bulgarian coach, I read a bunch of his work, and he did a presentation and at a I think it was at a strength conditioning deal. And I started, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, reading a bunch of his information about, how they trained with, training maxes, daily maxes, and they would take heart rates, and they knew if a guy was training at too high a heart rate, that was, frying him on the backside. And they knew there was a competition training. And when we would do that type of, 1RM stuff, we had a whole deal where it was like no emotion, there was no stomping your feet, no screaming, no banging the bar, getting excited. Because the problem is the minute that you start tapping into that emotion and you start tapping into that energy source, you can, all of a sudden PR lift by anywhere from, 4 to 10%, by going into that place. And the problem is, though, if you go to that well too much, all of a sudden it starts becoming diminishing returns. And then that's where you see people that, artificially get there, whether, you watch a guy in his training and all of a sudden he's popping smelling salts and screaming and yelling, music up, popping, everything from ephedrine to, Adderall. I mean, no matter what it is, slamming Red Bulls. And the problem is that becomes that kind of, law of diminishing returns where all of a sudden, what you do is here and you keep kind of going. Yeah, it's not sustainable. And people train like that. I mean, I've known guys that have trained like that for years and they just absolutely fry themselves. So a big part, and I was one of those guys, loud music, let's fucking rock and roll. And every workout had to be this fucking weight room warrior assault. And, after a while, it just completely fucking fries you. And when I read a lot of Abadjayev's work where they, we started taking heart rates and we would, we were wearing heart rate monitors during the lifts and, how fast you were recovering, it became very apparent that, you need to, be able to kind of differentiate the difference between training and testing. And I think that's really where we really got into this training versus testing model that, training is training, testing is testing. And the problem is that every single day that you walk into the gym, you are, looking to test. After a while, you're going to fry yourself on the back end and you're not going to, and it's not sustainable. So, the idea of training and testing, and, we've seen it with even the top CrossFit athletes, where their ability, and we talked about it yesterday, their ability to stay relaxed under load is what has been so it just blows my mind. I mean, when I was out at Reebok, we talked about it yesterday on the round table, that these athletes out there are hard charging athletes, but every one of them is so cool, calm, and collected and relaxed during the workouts that they're even though it looks like they're testing and they're really going, they're really staying super relaxed. I mean, the ability to have 400 pounds under your back and stay relaxed with 400 pounds is it's pretty impressive. So I think that idea of like, hey, if I have to have somebody spit in my mouth and kick me in the nuts and slap me in the face before every single lift or every single workout, I'm not going to be able to sustain and let alone continue to make gains year after year if I constantly have to tap into that emotional, that level of intensity to be able to survive my workout. So
does that mean I'm out of the job? Who's going to do that? Who's going to slap your face?
I wouldn't let you spit in my mouth. You have SARS.
Temporarily.
Callie. Syphilis, yeah.
Well, yeah, Callie. Rumor has it Callie was
making my brain.
Yeah, Callie was making out with a gypsy on 4th of July and contracted Ebola virus or SARS or something. She came in the other day and I was like,
he was just a carrier though.
Yeah. I was like, I haven't seen a cough like that since I saw the movie The Hot Zone.
What?
That's why I started calling Callie Patient Zero over here. Or no, she was Patient One. She met Patient Zero. But I like, that's really the and we write a lot of this stuff in, and I think by just design that people are going to want to go hard, but you almost, like we said, it's type A's, you got to save them from themselves a little bit and realize, what, like, in the NFL, we only played on Sundays. Now we went in and we practiced, but our full speed in practice was never our full speed in the game. And, we reserved that final gear, that last little bit, that last 10, 15% for game day, because if you always went to that place in practice, and the guys that had to go to that 100% every day in practice rarely had that extra gear in the games. So, it becomes this, deal. And, just like with Rob doing his program, I mean, a big thing we stressed is he's like, well, how do I know 1RM is good? I'm like, when it gets slow, as long as it continues to stay fast, you can continue to progress. The minute that all of a sudden you hit a sticking point, the bar slows down, or all of a sudden it becomes grindy, then you got to cut the weight or you went too heavy. So, that idea of being able to move the bar 0.8 meters per second and just be explosive and quick becomes huge in terms of understanding that, those intensities.
And lo and behold, even at 42 and having a kid and running multiple businesses, I continue to improve. I just told my coach that I'm going to commit to doing the Masters Worlds in November down to Long Beach. And basically the deal would be that if I win that, then I get my purple belt, which would be an absolute fucking coup. And it's the only way I'll get my purple belt before I'm like 45. So it's
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
His coach is named John. What's his last name? Can you say?
My coach her name is Kelly Weatherford. That's yeah. She's my jiu-jitsu coach. Yeah.
Rob, I have a question just on being on and being off, kind of acute and day to day. I know that cool down, stretching, it's a hard sell. And I've been reading kind of Vershasanti's stuff, like if you don't stretch or cool down, then recovery doesn't start till 4 hours later. And I know people are quick to grab a shake. People are quick to kind of eat post-workout. So without that stretch or cool down is kind of that absorption with the blood in your muscles versus your, GI tract. Is that absorption affected by not stretching or cooling down?
Oh man, honestly, I don't know, but it makes, this is I'm guessing here. This is an opinion piece, but when you're working out, you're very much in that sympathetic dominant fight or flight kind of mode to some degree. And like John, like we've been talking about, we're trying to mitigate how far down that road that we go. We're not completely listening to, ride the lightning, headbutting the bar, before every set, but you're still up more than in a recovery state. And so it makes sense that if you're not doing something to really legitimately pull it out of one gear and shift it into a different gear, and like doing some deep breathing, some stretching, some relaxation stuff at the end, like you really do need to shift gears So that even, shifting blood flow from the muscles to the gut is one of those key indicators of being sympathetic versus parasympathetic dominant. And when we start shifting blood flow to the gut to get to nutrients to then shift back out to the peripheral tissues, that's a really important thing. And so, I mean, it makes sense. I have absolutely no data on you need to do X amount of stretching or foam rolling or deep breathing or whatever. But from a mechanistic standpoint, it really makes sense that you've got to keep some recovery activity in there to help encourage your body to go from that fight or flight mode into a maintenance and recovery mode. It definitely makes sense, but I have no idea what volume, what type of things you need to do. Stretching, deep breathing, getting heart rate down to a normal baseline. Again, a meditation app type deal, synchronizing breath and movement, like some kind of yogic flow type stuff. Definitely seems like it would be good.
Well, I mean, we do, some recovery stuff. I mean, that idea of just doing some, steady state, kind of low capacity kind of recovery. Like the other day on CrossFit Football, it was like walk, 45 to 60 minutes with like a 50-pound weighted vest. And people were like, what does this have to do with football? I'm like, absolutely nothing. It's about recovery. Just fucking get out of the gym, put on a heavy vest, and go take a fucking walk, get some sunlight, get out of the gym, enjoy it. And the best is I programmed it in Cali, who did the CrossFit Football with Tex before they worked with us, was like, Tex made me load up a backpack with 2 slam balls, and we had to walk around DC. That was the stupidest fucking thing. And I even said, what the fuck does this have to do with football? And I laughed. I was like, it has nothing to do with football. It's about getting you outside, just getting you a little bit of recovery. And the thing which is interesting is I'll walk in the mornings, and it takes me about a mile to even get my heart rate up over 100. So I mean, I walk for that first mile, and I'm trying to really walk fast. It takes me a while. When I wear the 50-pound weighted vest, it takes me like half of the time, if not a quarter of the time, to be able to get my heart rate up. So, and then it stays pretty consistent, when you wear that weighted vest. So it's just literally about, letting you get outside and do something. So, I mean, not everything is about getting you ready, in terms of specific, like this energy system. Like some of these are about recovery, and, you got to kind of skin it and get people out there to do that. So that was funny that Callie said that.
Denny, how long have we been going right now?
Shit. The typical hour and a half, maybe.
Okay.
Oh, Jesus.
We keep getting more questions, which makes me think the longer we stay on, the more viewers are going to come on. But we can't. This can't last forever.
If that's an hour and a half.
We have a couple of really good questions, but unfortunately, I just think it's going to take. They're really involved questions, so we'll have to save them for next time Robb is on.
And guys, Robb is a member of the Field Strong family, so hopefully if
I'm not on the each day-to-day stuff as much as I would like, because again, I'm kind of following my own abbreviated template, but when people ping me questions, I answer them. So if you hit up Robb, we could hit him in the nutrition and start some dialogue. So if you got some stuff now with that in mind, don't fucking hit him up like 100 times a day. Yeah, don't be like, Robb Wolf, if I have 39 grams of carbohydrates post-workout, is that going to be better than 40 grams? I'll tell you what gets answered is stuff that is concise.
Yeah. So Tamara's question, Tamara, you can ping your question straight to Robb because it was very precise and it's a very specific question. And I just don't think we have time to go over the rest of the questions, but is there anything else?
No.
Robb, anything coming up for you that you want to mention?
No. I mean, we're working on the City Zero project. Really, really exciting stuff going on with that. The Power Athlete family is going to play a significant role in all that stuff. Just to remind people what the story was with that, we did a 2-year pilot study with Reno Police, Reno Fire, put them on a paleo diet, got them lifting weights, doing smarter training, modifying their sleep. And the pilot study saved the city of Reno $22 million. We've been ramping this thing up, getting ready to take it nationally and internationally. We're hiring a completely top of the food chain CEO to run this thing. I've been kind of in that position, but not everybody with absolutely no credentials for CEOing can build a mega business. So I actually had the wherewithal to actually get some aces in their places. But really exciting stuff with that. Very, very exciting. I think it's legitimately going to help a lot of people, and it's going to be a lot of fun too. So that's kind of the big thing that I'm hammering on, which we have certifications, nutrition and training certifications in process with all that stuff.
Do y'all have a website for that?
Not yet. We're waiting to crack. It's a long story. Like when I get to tell that whole story, it'll actually be kind of interesting. But we do not. I've just done a couple of blog posts on it. If people Google like Robb Wolf risk assessment, then you can see what I've written on that. I have like 4 blog posts on it currently.
It's why you're firing yourself as CEO.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Great.
But I'm going on as chief strategist because I like that.
Self-appointed.
He's actually going on as Chief Optimus Prime.
The assistant to the assistant regional manager.
Yeah.
Corporate accounting. Just a moment. All right.
Well, thanks, Rob. That was awesome, dude.
I'm stoked. I'm a little sad it took so long to get me on here. I felt like the redheaded stepchild or something. So.
Oh, the problem is that you got to get through so many people. There's so many layers to get through Robb Wolf. I mean, you got to get through the entourage to finally drag you on here. But thank you very much. That was awesome, dude.
We text like 6 times a day, so it's super hard to track me down. So.
Dude, just because we're like 13-year-old girls,
but it's just emojis.
Yeah. Actually, Rob's real big on the emojis. I'll get like a pig with a gun and like a pile of poop and be like, pig, gun, poop. What does that one mean?
Like, I'm not really comfortable with this. Like, we're good friends, but I'm not comfortable with this at all.
And it just says like 10:30.
Yeah, and then I'll get like a bunch of like tears with a thumbs up, and I'm like, why is Brewer crying right now?
Oh God, I'm glad I was taken off those group texts.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Rob.
But huge honor being on. A lot of fun. You talk to you guys soon.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Rob. All right.
Bye.